Thanks, Vinnie, for inviting me to speak on your podcast. It's been a long time since I think we've seen each other, and this is a little far afield from what we would usually chat about.
Well, I'm envious about what you're doing. So this is fantastic, and I like to invite authors to talk about their books, and I'm glad you accepted my invitation.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. For those of you who may not either recognize me or know me, I used to work with Vinnie back at Gartner in the 90s, in the heydays of this little thing you may have heard of called ERP. And we had a little bit to do with it at the time.
Don't tell the world that. People hate ERP today.
Well, now I have my feet in the fields and I'm growing stuff. So right now, instead of looking at the new technology growth, I'm looking at plant growth and how, in particular, plants can help soothe people and work in a therapeutic way. And for the last 20 years or so, I have been working first sort of part-time as I was still doing consulting work. But then once I retired from the industry in the late aughts, pretty much full-time as a horticulturalist and a horticultural therapist at a wide variety of venues. And those experiences where I've worked with literally over 1,000 clients in that time frame from all sorts of walks of life, I've encapsulated in the book. So the book is called A Therapist's Garden Using Plants to Revitalize Your Spirit. And it's about horticultural therapy. But probably there's a bunch of you asking, well, I've heard of you as an analyst, but what does really a horticultural therapist do? And it's a bunch of different things. First is that you're not really a plant whisperer. You're not talking to a plant that appears sad and trying to make it happy. So there may be some people who actually would like you to do that, but that's not what you do. What you really do is you use plants as a modality to work with clients' physical, cognitive, emotional, and social challenges. So depending upon the client base you have and what their needs are, you use either working with plants, propagating plants, looking at plants, smelling plants and herbs to work through those different challenges that individuals have. A key part of that, however, is that you really have to know your plants. Clients, if they don't feel like you're knowledgeable about a subject, and this is probably very common to a lot of folks, they don't trust you. So you need to understand a lot about a lot of different things. Now, for every plant I know, there's probably 10 I don't. But what you have to do is create your own little space where you are very strong and you know what you're talking about, so that clients have confidence that when you suggest certain things to them, they will be able to move forward with you.
I'll let you know a secret. Google has a lens on the mobile app, and you can take it close to a plant, and 9 times out of 10, it's pretty good. It tells you.
Yeah. No, in fact, it's funny you mentioned that. I use that all the time. There are a bunch of different websites and apps that identify plants, but I found Google Lens to be much superior to that, which is kind of funny because you would think a specialty app would be better, but it isn't. Google Lens is very good in that venue. And then at the end, you use plants to help people in all sorts of different ways. So that's and sort of a quick diatribe. That's really what a horticultural therapist does. Now, let me tell you how I got into this. And it all started when I started taking master gardening classes in around 2000. I was still in the technology game then, but I had left Gartner. And because I was consulting, I had more access and more ability to control my time. And so I got involved in horticultural therapy as part of a project I did as becoming a master gardener, because when you do that, you have to do a variety of community projects. And so just let me read you a little bit from the prologue to give you an idea of how I got started on this journey. At the entrance of a drab red brick building hidden in the woods, I push the buzzer on the intercom, identifying myself and the person I am there to see. A crackly, static-laden voice acknowledges my request, and after a minute, the large gray steel entry door swings open toward me. I am led down a concrete stairwell with beige block walls and through another locked steel door. I then walk along a stark hallway lined with gray doors, each having a tiny glass window at eye level. Turning left, I exit via a windowless metal door into a small yard surrounded by a galvanized chain link fence topped with barbed wire. In the middle of an untended mat of weeds and grass sits an empty but magnificent greenhouse. Do you think you can help us use it to grow plants? Asked one ponytailed girl standing within the group. Dressed in white sweatshirts, black sweatpants, and cheap white sneakers, the girls appear sad, hurt, embarrassed, and scared that they are trapped in a juvenile detention center. They are just children, but after a few weeks, these morose detainees are transformed into happy teens after we clean up the greenhouse and start to build a garden that they will care for and own. Over 2 decades ago, that was my introduction to the healing power and potential for joy that horticultural therapy can deliver to people, and I continue to see it daily.
That's a great story right there.
Yeah.
I'm sure over 20 years you've added hundreds more.
Oh yeah, well that's the funny thing is that if you look at the lower right picture, I mean, and you look at the greenhouse there, it's behind barbed wire. I mean, if you think about that, growing plants behind barbed wire, it's kind of counterintuitive. And so by going there and being able to use the greenhouse and claim the space, I was able to help these girls who were in the pre-adjudication stages of the legal system. They were between 13 and 18, and they were in this facility anywhere from 2 to 9 months. So, I mean, if you think about that, I mean, these are children. It's a horrible thing, but I was able to bring them out and create joy in their lives and make them feel better about themselves, that they weren't losers. They would just found themselves in unfortunate situations, and it really helped them both mentally as well as spiritually, in terms of just getting them to more accept themselves in the situation that they're in. And it really modified their behavior greatly. So that was kind of how I got started with this. Now, the next question people ask is, so why did I write the book? And again, it was a long journey that started over 20 years ago. I started doing this in terms of being a master gardener, and I was still working, doing my own stuff in the consulting world. During that time, I had written a book called Technology Paradise Lost, which wasn't a bad book. It was good, I think, but and it got a bit of notoriety. But then I was doing my own thing, and then my father contracted lung cancer in 2007. And that really changed my life, because I had to rethink my priorities and work with my mother to take care of my dad, who eventually died 9 months after he was diagnosed. But was interesting is that during the time he was undergoing treatment, my mother and I would go to parks and we would go to nurseries, and some of the things that really just helped her better cope with the very difficult decisions and situation we had was the fact that we could go and look at plants. She could smell flowers. She could see and stroke a beautiful lilac. And that really changed her view about things and helped her get through the whole issue. About a year after that, my wife, who was taking botanical illustration classes at the time at the New York Botanical Gardens, got a catalog for courses. And in the back of the catalog, there was a certificate program for horticultural therapy. And the moment I looked at it, just everything clicked. I said, you know what? I don't need to be a technology analyst anymore. I have a real passion for plants, and I want to do this. So I threw myself into a new education in an incredible way. And it really motivated me. One of the first things I did, again, in a lot of these programs, you have to do an internship. And I interned at a facility called Green Chimneys, which is a school for at-risk children in Brewster, New York. It's about 50 miles north of Manhattan. And there you have children who are basically from kindergarten to 12th grade. And there's about 250 of them. And they have a wide variety of challenges and problems. And so I worked there for for first as an intern and then more on a part-time basis for 3 years, working with a lot of children on an individual basis. I then started a blog called Grow Happy, which was looking at the things I was doing in horticultural therapy. And then I started working at a facility called Ann's Place, which deals with cancer patients and their families. It was funny. They had approached me a number of times, but because of my father's death, I wasn't really ready to work at that kind of place. But then after a while, it just seemed like it was the right thing for me to do. So I talked to the executive director and they gave me full run. I designed all the gardens and the grounds. I designed programs there. And I've been working there now for over 12 years, working with basically cancer patients and their families. Also, after that, I did a bunch of work at a nursing home and independent living facility called Meadow Ridge, which deals with folks, basically elderly folks in all the final kind of stages of life, from independent living to assisted living to basically nursing care, including dementia and physical issues. And then after a long time, I had all this material and I said, maybe it's time that I put this together and write a book. And so I started writing A Therapist's Garden in 2019, and it was published earlier this year. So that's kind of the long story about how I came to all this and got out of the technology field and became an avid gardener and naturalist.
Well, Erik, two things. One, thank you so much for your service to society. I mean, quite impressive, prisoners and young prisoners and elderly patients. And yeah, you contributed a lot. And then second, as an author of 7 books, thank you for writing a book.
Well, yes, it's 7. It's funny. It talks about a lot. My wife's father, my father-in-law, wrote over 35 books during his lifetime. And, actually he published more books after he died than I published while I'm alive. So I don't think I'll ever be able to catch up to that.
You don't want to. These things are demanding, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's just interesting dealing with the whole publishing process. I mean, you're more continuous in what you've done. But for me, I did my first book in 2003. And then, I just did my last book, like 18 years later. So it's a big difference in terms of the technology and what you have to do. And, you need to have a social platform. And so there's a lot of different things now versus, almost 20 years ago.
But, authors control more of the message.
That's true. And that is one thing. I mean, I have basically a small independent publisher, and I was pretty much able to control, I mean, there are always issues, but I mean, the look of the book, how it came out was pretty much, you can credit or blame me for, most of it. So I'm very happy with what has eventually come out.
Well, keep going. Let's hear more about it.
Okay. So I just give you an idea about some of the things that we did. And, here's one place that I worked at, Green Chimneys. And again, we're dealing with these children that have all kinds of issues. And so one of the things that you do when you're working with at-risk children is you kind of have to figure out different ways to excite them and different ways to get to them, because I would typically work in a day with anywhere from 6 to 8 different kids on different kinds of projects. And here you see a child, in the snow. Well, underneath those little structures, those are called hoop houses. We're actually growing greens. So underneath them are fresh kale and broccoli and all sorts of cold weather vegetables that we were wintering over. And one of the things that we did at Green Chimneys is we created a 4-season garden so that we would actually get the kids out and gardening in the middle of January. So you could literally go out. And in fact, this in one of the stories in my book, I talk about how this one young boy got very excited when he was able to pull a carrot from the garden in the middle of January. Now, I know Vinnie down in Florida, that's no big deal. That happens all the time. But up here in New England, it's a little more of a special event. So the thing with Green Chimneys is that when you're working with these kids, you have to basically have a bunch of different plans in your pocket in terms of what you're going to do with them, because you never really know the emotional state they're going to arrive at your doorstep, so to speak. So and so the different plans that you may have for the day, you may have to throw them out the window because the weather's changed. The child is not in a good place to do the kind of thing you want to help. And then with each child, you have to have a different kind of activity that will help them from either the physical, the social, the cognitive, et cetera, problem and challenge that they have. So it makes it a really interesting job. You have to be very quick on your feet and able to sort of very much roll with it. If you have a very set protocol, you're not going to be successful. So you have to, roll with things and have a bunch of different programs in your pocket. But again, that to me, that was exciting because if you're able to reach a person like that, it's a very special feeling and it's a special time because you're helping them and they're becoming a better person for that. And so this is just one of the places that I've worked with. Again, I've worked with a wide variety of different clients and people. Right now, it's mostly cancer patients, but this was just one example that I talk about or write about in the book about all these different experiences working with these youths.
With the cancer patients, do you have to be a little less? I presume they can't physically cope with the demands of gardening. Do you have to help them more?
It depends on where they are in the therapy. Some people are very weak, other people have stronger abilities, and some people are there for emotional support, so they've thoroughly recovered. But the thing when you're doing this kind of therapy is that it can have very different results. So, for instance, one of the favorite therapies with my cancer patients is aromatherapy. And so here's sort of two examples, one that went not so good and the other one that went very well. So in one example, there's a gentleman who came for the first time and we were creating seasonal sachets. And so typically what you do is you pass around different herbs and different horticultural oils so people can get an idea about what they want to create. And for this gentleman, when lavender came to him, he stopped and he started to tear up. And it turned out he had come to this class because his wife had just died and he was looking for solace. But his wife loved lavender. And so it just like hit him the entire wrong way. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't be here anymore. I have to leave. So he left and he was very upset. So I'm like, well, gee, that went well. But I mean, that's sometimes one of the things that happens. Now, flash forward to a few years later, same kind of class, different client. This one client hadn't seen her before. She was in the middle of chemotherapy and radiation. She had no hair, so she had a headband on. She was very skinny and emaciated. Her skin was like thin paper and very pale. Her eyes were sunken and sallow. I mean, somebody was really suffering through the cure of cancer, of severe cancer. And so lavender comes to her. All of a sudden, she brightens up. She says, I can smell this. This is the first time I've been able to smell something in 3 years. And a tear starts to come out of one of her eyes. And then she says, give me something else. So somebody gave her some rosemary and the same thing happens. And so she starts crying. She goes, oh my God, this is fantastic. I haven't been able to smell. This is wonderful. So the class starts crying. I mean, everybody goes crazy because, this woman had such a wonderful moment. So again, you have the same exact therapy, but it has two very different effects on two very different individuals.
Well, you're making me tear up.
So I guess how different is this than a prior life? I mean, I hopefully in the prior life,
or for some of us still the present life.
The present life. Well, my prior life. So, we typically don't do 3-letter acronyms. We're not, we don't do any of that. The learning curves are just as steep. I mean, I think about the changes in technology that you have to absorb all the time. But it's different because you're learning about plants in a different way. And again, there's so many plants. I mean, the thing that I love about horticulture is that unlike some technologies, it builds on it builds on itself. So once the Latin for oak tree, which is quercus, you don't need to learn it again. You're not going to get a Java version of this. So I don't have to learn anything new from that. But there's so much. There's so many plants out there. There's so many cultivars out there. There's so much to learn. And the thing too is that with the changing environment, there's all sorts of different conditions that you have to deal with. And just even in an environment that doesn't change, there's so much variation. So it's just fascinating and challenging to try to keep ahead of everything.
Isn't there more? We went to a Green Thumb festival here a couple of weeks ago. And I was blown away at how much material, posters, and books were being given out for free, right? And then diagnostic clinics, and so isn't there more mobile apps, more websites? Isn't there much more information available also?
Well, it's more accessible. I mean, that's the great thing. I mean, and I'll talk about this a little bit on the next slide, between all the social media, between all the websites, between all of this stuff, it is just so easy to get stuff. I mean, before, 20 years ago, when I was starting to learn some of this stuff, if you say, okay, I want this rare type of hydrangea, you'd be hard pressed to find it because you would just go to some of your local nurseries and they wouldn't know about it. Whereas now you just type it into a browser and you can find, 5 places that will mail it to you. So, and then if you have a problem, you can basically go to a variety of social media sites or websites. And there's a lot of really good ones out there that will help you get through the challenge and the problem. So that is, it's really wonderful. Things that people are starting to do, and again, I'll be talking about this sort of in the next slide, is that when you start looking at things like drone technology and you have people take these high shots of their gardens, it's like, wow, it gives you a thoroughly different perspective of what you've done. But getting back to this is, so the thing that you focus on here is you focus sort of on the individual rather than the enterprise. Everybody, even when I do group classes, I try to work with every individual because, again, everybody comes to these classes for different reasons. Everybody is trying to get something different out of it. And so you have to try to play to that with the client. And so there's no big holistic thing or idea or theorem you can come up with, but it's rather what each person feel as if they're in a better place than they were before they came to your class, which is why, again, they have different needs. And as you may have surmised, I'm not getting rich doing this, but what I am is getting a lot of personal pleasure out of it and, helping people. Not just strangers, but also people in my family, because I've helped them using horticultural therapy get through some difficult times.
You mean cryptocurrency hasn't enriched your environment?
No, not really. I'm sorry. We'll give that one a miss, at least for now. So, and I've kind of talked about this. Web offers great resources. Ironically, the thing is one of the things that I do when I post on my social media, I always use Latin because over about a quarter of my client readers on Instagram and Facebook, they're in Australia and the UK. And in Australia and UK, they call things very different in terms of vegetables and flowers than we do here in the States. So by giving the Latin for it, which is the international language of plants, people can really identify what you're talking about. And with plants, it's super easy. There's all sorts of, clethra is also called super sugar sweet. So, I mean, there's all sorts of different words that people give plants, but when you give it the fundamental Latin, they will know what you are talking about.
You're talking about global audiences, right?
Right,
so I was
right.
talking to somebody at SAP yesterday, and I said, how's the struggle season? The white asparagus. And he started saying, he said, Vinnie, over the last few years, Americans have been exporting to us green asparagus. And so now you see people blending white and green and all kind of, it's kind of interesting how the world has become smaller that way.
Well, yeah, I remember in my salad days as an analyst at Gartner, going to Waldorf and seeing the fields of white spargel across from the main headquarters. And I grow my own asparagus. And by the way, once you grow your own asparagus, you can never go back to store bought. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's a totally different experience. But white asparagus isn't a special asparagus. What they do is, as the head pops up under the ground, they pile more soil around it. So because it doesn't get sunlight, chlorophyll doesn't fix it, and so it doesn't turn green, so it stays white. But it's a very labor intensive activity to keep the spears white. So it's nothing special. It's just how you pile the soil so it doesn't turn green.
Please don't tell them that. That's not special.
Well, you know, I actually do. I have a lot of friends who are German, and yes, when it's Spargel season, I mean, everything comes out. But let me tell you, I was in Germany a couple of times during Spargel season, and after a while, you have more Spargel than you can ever want.
I know what you mean.
Well, and by the way, that's always the lament of gardeners. You know, people who grow things like zucchini, you know, if you let a zucchini out of, you know, if you take your eyes off it for a day or two, you'll have something the size of a small car. So, you know, again, you have to be very careful. But again, the thing I love about this is that the skills and experiences are based upon long-term proven techniques. The techniques that were used 200 years ago for successful, particularly organic gardening, are still being used today, which I think is a lot of the techniques are still very viable. And as I said, drones and mapping software can create.
Are there any major breakthroughs in the? Well, let me explain. So Margaret and I were stargazing, and there were a couple of fairly seasoned astronomers there, and they were saying it's remarkable how much new astronomy has learned in the last 30 years. You know, as telescopes have become more powerful, and we got the James Warner telescope now that is able to look in the infrared. They said we're discovering things that we weren't taught in college, right? Mm-hmm. Are you finding in gardening similar breakthroughs, or is it steady?
Yeah, no, the biggest, there are actually a bunch of breakthroughs right now. The biggest breakthroughs is that because they're beginning to do gene sequencing of plants, they're finding out that a lot of not a lot, but a good number of plants are actually miscategorized. Because the way all these things got named is somebody would look at a plant and say, well, you know, that looks like a dogwood, so it must be a dogwood. But it actually, when you do the genetic analysis, it looks like a dogwood, but it actually isn't a dogwood. So there's a whole new part of plant recategorization that's going on right now. Also, part of the genetic analysis is ways to save certain types of plants. For instance, the American chestnut has almost been eliminated. It's a beautiful tree from the United States because of blight. But what they're doing is they're doing some genetic cross breeding and creating new cultivars that will be resistant to what killed off the original American chestnut. So there's some interesting stuff happening along that, but those ways. And like I said, with things like drones and all the websites out there, there are new things. And of course, you know, cross-pollination. Of course, there's a lot of discussion around, you know, GMO type of seeds. So that's a big controversy in a lot of areas. So there are things that are happening, but I think for your average backyard gardener, it's kind of slow and steady.
Well, Erik, congratulations on the book. It's available now, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's been available for about a month. So it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for coming on the show. We'll hopefully get you a few more copies sold from this.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me.
And keep doing what you're doing. Boy, that's really God's work you're doing. Thank you.
No, well, thank you.